Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Lost my vision in '92, and one of the first questions I had when getting involved with the American Council of the Blind was, how does a blind person vote? And I was told we don't.
Some of the feelings that we have about progress with respect to voting rights. We've made it so that you can get to the top of the ramp, but you still can't get in the door.
It was a fact that persons with disabilities have not had equal opportunity at the polls, starting right at getting in the door.
A lot of people with psychiatric disabilities, unfortunately, do not vote.
It was more of an attitudinal barrier in commitment. Once they made that commitment, it got done. Thomas Paine once said that the right of voting for representatives is the primary right by which other rights are protected. Hi, I'm Gary O'Brien, Chair of the New York State Commission on Quality of Care and Advocacy for Persons with Disabilities, which is proud to co-sponsor this educational series with the New York State Bar Association and with generous financial support from the New York Bar Foundation. This edition of Disability in the Law is entitled Getting In to Vote. Since the well-documented voting problems of the 2000 national election and the subsequent passage of the Help American Vote Act of 2002, commonly referred to as HAVA, the United States has begun to actively modernize its voting systems. HAVA's primary purpose is to provide funding to states to improve the quality, reliability, accuracy, accessibility, affordability, and security of voting equipment, election systems, and voting technology. Among HAVA's many noteworthy goals are to make voting equipment and systems fully accessible for individuals with disabilities, including people who are blind and visually impaired, to ensure that such individuals can vote independently and with privacy. As the experts in this edition of Disability in the Law discuss, this has not been an easy process. Although progress has been made, significant challenges remain. I hope that this show provides you with a good introduction to the legal and personal issues involved in assuring persons with disabilities have the opportunity to fulfill their right to vote in an accessible and private manner. I hope you enjoy the show.
The Help America Vote Act is an election reform statute that was passed after the 2000 election and everything that happened in Florida. And for the most part, it was to change how we administer elections in federal elections specifically. Now, although most people see it as an election reform statute to the disability community, it's more than that. It's actually a civil rights statute because it's the first statute ever to federally mandate that people with disabilities have the right to vote privately and independently. And before the Help America Vote Act, that was not guaranteed under any federal or state statute.
We've had long-standing problems in New York and the rest of the country with voting systems, with making it easy to vote, register and vote, and accessible for all eligible citizens. That's been an ongoing struggle, and history of the country has been one of opening up democracy to more and more people, removing barriers. So HAVA was a terrific opportunity to address both the kind of problems that we saw in Dade County, in West Palm Beach in Florida, but some long-standing issues on accessibility to registration and voting in this country. HAVA provided an opportunity to meaningfully open up the process to those Americans.
The implementation of the Help America Vote Act was critical in our efforts, and we visited policymakers over and over again to give them a first-hand look through our eyes, through our words, at the way we saw Election Day. We explained to them what I think Tom Paine once said, that voting is the right from which all other rights spring, and that it was absolutely imperative that New York get this right.
PAVA was the program that allowed localities to gain access to the information they needed around voting, around the new legislation that came down the pike. Without that education, we would not have gotten as many people involved in coming out to test the new models, in voicing their opinions to the decision makers about what works and what doesn't work. We've had the chance to also educate agencies, organizations, and because many organizations don't know what's happening in the electoral process. There's a major societal change happening that without the PAVA grant, many people would not know about and would not pay attention to. So the PAVA organization, Sydney had the opportunity to go out to the downstate area and educate individuals as well as organizations about voting access, about the new changes coming down, and that people with disabilities no longer have to hide behind their bedroom door, cast a ballot, an absentee ballot that may or may not be counted when all is said and done, and no longer have to be excluded from the exiting polls that are taken when you leave the polling site.
In 1968, I tried to vote in the Democratic Party primary for Eugene McCarthy, who of course was on the ballot. In the area where I was voting, I think the Democratic poll watchers were rather more interested in having me vote for somebody else. I had just had some surgery on my eye, so I needed assistance, and I asked for a poll worker to go into the booth with me. I'm not sure if she was rattled by being in such close proximity with a stranger or exactly what was going on, but she ended up insisting that McCarthy was not on the ballot, which he absolutely was. And over my objection, she wrote his name in the space for a write-in candidate. And as I learned later, that voided my ballot. So the person who was supposed to help me, in fact, prevented me from voting.
My personal experience has been one of compromise. okay, I compromise my privacy to a great extent, and I can compromise my independence since I have always needed assistance in the voting booth. I have never had the opportunity to cast a secret ballot in my 30 years of voting.
A number of years ago, we got involved in looking at the accessibility of polling sites on election days. And New York City was proudly saying that almost all of its voting sites were accessible. But when we brought together volunteer teams of people with disabilities to go and assess the sites, we found something quite shocking. We found that more than half of the sites, in fact, a real majority, were inaccessible for one reason or another. Frequently, they were inaccessible because ramps were poorly constructed or were obstructed by debris so that they were impassable. There were so many issues that with good scrutiny, the day before Election Day or the morning of Election Day, those problems could have been solved. Often problems were related to good signage or lack thereof. We simply felt that New York City had to do better. So we launched our own civil rights campaign. And a civil rights campaign to us means a campaign where you are educating the public as well as policymakers and building an understanding of why the rights you're talking about are really about basic human dignity for everybody.
In a county the size of Kings County, which is where Brooklyn is, there are over 2 million people and perhaps hundreds of election districts. To have one specially designated accessible polling site for the whole borough, I see that as a serious logistical problem. For people that were going to vote at this specially designated site that lived all the way on the other side, the process would turn into easily a 5 to 6 hour journey through either paratransit or mass transit to go from a place like Canarsie or Bensonhurst or Marine Park.
In the beginning of the 1900s, you had waves of immigration, of Asian Americans, of Eastern Europeans, of Italians, of folks who were different religions and ethnicities than the folks who were here, which were primarily white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestants, that stereotype. And that's when you began to have all of these barriers to registration put in place. So the barriers started in the early 1900s. And those barriers are primarily put in place to disenfranchise and target particular groups, but their impact has gone beyond that. Their impact, that registration is not automatic, people have to go out and find registration forms. And that's also a way which it definitely impacts on voters with disabilities as well.
With the introduction of electronic voting, it has really helped individuals with disabilities because it has allowed them to vote privately and independently. At the same time, it's raised questions regarding the security and accuracy of the ballots. I'm not a security expert. However, I think that security and accessibility can be compatible. It takes time, it takes money, and it takes laws requiring specifically that whatever standard we're going to use to increase accuracy, to increase the integrity of our elections are also accessible. One thing we cannot do is turn back and we've made great strides with HAVA, and we can't just turn the corner and say we're going to go to, for instance, a paper trail that's not accessible. That does not make our elections more secure if a big lot of our ballots aren't verifiable by certain individuals. So, but I do think that verification can be made accessible. Like I said, though, it's going to take time, money, and the law is requiring it. And that's why manufacturers will build it if there's a law requiring it.
I think, first of all, that persons with disabilities are just as interested in a secure election process and an election process with integrity as able voters are. I think that we have the technological potential in this country, certainly, to develop a voting system which is both secure and accessible. The consequence of which is that the states did not get the guidance from the federal government that they are required in order to make what is admittedly a big change in voting systems from what we had before towards something that was secure and accessible today and in the future.
What's important to us are the accessibility features of any machine. What we care about is no matter what manufacturer and what style of machine is selected, that it is as broadly usable by people with as many different kinds of disabilities as possible. There are many, many, many groups weighing in on the privacy and security of the ballot, and we agree that that is a really crucial issue. However, we have a really singular mission, and one that no other community can carry for us, and one that we must give voice to on our own. And that is our access as people with disabilities to voting, just like everybody else.
In New York, because of our state's, what's called our full-face ballot requirement, which requires that the entire ballot be presented to voters when they first are looking at their ballot, our options are a little bit more limited in other states. And the two contenders are what's called direct recording electronic machines, or some people I call them as a computerized touchscreen, kind of like an ATM. The fancy ATMs, though, where you can touch the screen and can indicate your choice, as well as an optical scan system, which is kind of filling out the lotto thing, where you use a pencil and you mark by hand what your choices are on a piece of paper. And for disability access, you're able to use a terminal which presents all of the options to you, either via headphones or toggle switches or sip and puff, and it will print out the ballot for you. The difference is both of those technologies, including DREs, have all these wonderful interfaces, but the DRE at the end of the process registers and counts the vote. An optical scan, either by hand or with this ballot marker, prints out a paper ballot, which is then fed into a scanner. NYPIRG, for years, and I go back to the late 80s, we were calling for replacing our lever machines, has followed the process. And we have actually, about a couple of months ago, finally took a position over which of those technologies we favor. And we support optical scan systems with a caveat. For us, there are still questions, particularly around disability and language access with an optical scan system. Because when you have a paper system, a lot of voters, if they're using the paper system, aren't going to be able to have immediate access to the bells and whistles that technology can give us. The headphones, the toggle switches, the instant translations, the contrast controls, enlarged fonts, or even clear instructions, better instructions than you would get from a poll worker. So for NYPIRG, we endorse the optical scan technology on the condition that ballot markers, which are these computerized technology which marks the ballot, which doesn't count it, are present or dedicated to each election district table. That's every single table that a voter might go to. Some folks support optical scan systems and maybe one of these ballot markers somewhere in the poll site. So you go to your table and then you have to maybe go wait on a separate line. We'd like to see a lot of ballot markers. We don't want to see voters segregated at poll sites. So you come in, you're either a voter with a disability or you're a voter who speaks Spanish and is entitled to your ballot in Spanish under the law here in New York, or you're a voter who just wants to use the terminal because has all these great prompts and undervote protections and notifications if you're doing something wrong. We think it's not correct to take those folks and say, okay, you go over to the other side of the gym and wait on that line now, where you're self-identifying yourself as someone who might be a language minority or voter with disability or anybody else, and also potentially subjecting yourself to longer lines. So for us, every voter at that table should have the choice. They can fill it out by hand if they want, but if they want to use a ballot marker, they should be able to do it there at their table.
I think that we have found in traveling throughout the state in the regional trainings that we've done over the past few years that that the local boards and the poll workers that normally man the polling sites in the counties are very enthusiastic. They want the voting experience to be a good experience for everyone. They really do want to help. Their difficulty is knowing exactly what it is that they should be doing.
There are many issues that we can do to improve our democracy, many things that we can do to improve our democracy. One, as I said, we can remove voter registration deadlines so that people can register and vote on Election Day. We can roll back restrictions on people voting who have criminal convictions, who are back in their communities. We can make voting more accessible to language minority citizens who need some language assistance in order to exercise their right to vote, they're being the citizens. We can make polling places and the voting booth more accessible to people with disabilities, and we can eliminate the kind of dirty tricks that we see in election after election where there are organized campaigns to suppress voting by spreading misinformation and other means to try to dampen the votes of a candidate's opponents.
When I was there for the polling site at the primary election, after I voted, it was curious. The Board of Elections workers, after I had my ballot dropped in the box, they broke out in applause. And I was not really, I don't want special appreciations. I don't want just to think, oh, that's so inspiring. I just want to vote, just like everybody else. We're making a difference gradually. I think it's going to happen eventually, but it's going to take a little time.
Ensuring that voting is a private, secure, and accessible process for all Americans is a national priority. As highlighted in today's show, Americans with disabilities, after years of unequal access, are particularly interested in achieving this goal. Although problems associated with technology, competing interest, public education, and voting processes are significant challenges, it is incumbent on all of us to be both vigilant and proactive in ensuring that everyone can get in to vote. On behalf of the co-sponsors of this program, thank you for watching another edition of Disability and the Law.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.